Catus Maximus here, this time with the Bergen, I should say. I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce her name. This is a set of quarter-inch hex impact external metric spiral screw and bolt extractors. Irwin, I think, has one of the more popular sets of these. They're kind of not that common, these types of impact screw extractors, or I should say just quarter-inch hex drive screw extractors. Irwin has a set of fractionals, like a 7-piece set that's been around for a while, so I think those are the most popular. And I think these Bergen ones are just because they noticed that Irwin's selling them, so they might as well put together a metric set. It says a 6 and then an 8, 9, 10, and then a 12, although there is another set for larger sizes. Got to be careful. Amazon is charging way too much. These are actually at a fastener supply, and I thought it was interesting. And these things were like 12 bucks on the counter. Huge price. They were like 30 on Amazon, so I'd hunt around, because Amazon isn't always the lowest prices, that's for sure. And on these, somebody's charging a bit much. I'll say on these Bergen ones, I kind of like this canvas pouch. Surprisingly enough, it's actually a more expensive pouch, just because, one, it's double layer. This is sewn on, but we don't see the sewing on the other side, so we know it's double layer, which is surprising. Nice edging around the sides, and then it actually has loops to hold the bits, and then a separate flap just over the top, so it's actually a surprisingly nice pouch. Some of the other things that they do cut a little bit of costs on these, such as the 9 and the 10 millimeter are actually cut from the same size stock, so that's why the 10 millimeter has thinner, or I should say the 10 millimeter walls are okay. The 9 millimeter walls are actually super thick. So I thought these are just handy for one, in situations where you may need a little more access. Many types of external spiral extractors have like a hex on them, so it makes them kind of hard to get into tighter spaces. And then really just the convenience of being able to take one of these, toss them in an impact driver and be able to drive out the fastener. I thought for me in particular, really the 8 millimeter, like this one, works really well, of course, on 5/16. And there's many situations, surprisingly enough, sheet metal buildings. If you're replacing or having to work on any type of sheet metal building or structures, many of those are held together with 5/16 or 3/8 fasteners that they get painted over and they're corroded. It's really, it's a real hassle to try to get a hex socket over the top of them. And this is the type of thing which, surprisingly enough, with heavily corroded or painted fasteners, you can just put one of these in and then be able to just knock out all the fasteners, just guaranteed, without having to fiddle around with trying to get just a normal socket over the top. And then another couple of quick tips about these style of tools. We'll start with the 12 millimeter here. These are these things are pretty strong and they're pretty hard, but they are disposable or consumable items. As these twist onto the bolts, the little flutes do get flattened and damaged, and it becomes real serious on very hard bolts, because the hard bolts will oftentimes, these may work on them, but they're not even hard enough to really bite into, say, maybe a socket head cap screw, which could easily be as hard as the steel that these are made out of, which of course means if they work, they just get totally beat up. Another thing is they size them so that they just barely fit over the tip of the fastener, because they're really trying to get a very deep bite. It isn't that these just have spiral flutes that come down at an angle. It's also tapered, so they get tighter as you go deeper into the socket. And the reason for that is, and we'll use a 3/8 fastener against the 10 millimeter, is if it sits down too low, such as this situation where this 10 millimeter may actually work on a 3/8 fastener, the issue is if it's already rounded out, that it may screw on, and say in this fastener, hit that bottom shelf and still not have enough bite, and then all it does is actually machine the top of the fastener into a taper, and then you're going to have a real special time. And so that's, with these types of spiral extractors, it is handy that they do that you can find them both in metric and standard, and I would recommend getting both. Here's another situation that an 8 millimeter, this little fastener, you can see it just barely sits over the top of it, just so it can get a really nice bite. Now, talking about the hardness of the cap screws, again, I think this is for the 10 millimeter, it's really obvious. Now, this is a very hard one. This is a 12.9, and when you put it in the extractor, even like these other fasteners, which are like a grade 8, these are middle grade 7s, you can actually feel them kind of biting into the metal. But with this screw here, the extractor really just wants to skate across the top of it. These can be handy for socket head cap screws, but this is a situation where if you do get it to remove a socket head cap screw, there's only going to be a few of them before the teeth are just totally beat up. So it's kind of surprising how some these are still relatively expensive for being disposable, but how online, some places are trying to charge, $30 or more for these types of things. Absolutely not, just because they're just the type of thing that just wears out real easily and quickly. But they can be a lifesaver, and in certain situations, they can save you a lot of time. Like that example is removing a bunch of screws, some sheet metal building or something like that. Those aren't going to be super tough, so you'll get some decent life out of them. But I just always thought these types of things were curious, and I've seen a few of them online and was actually surprised to see some in a local store. So I decided to pick them up, and actually think the worst part about them is it's just such a short set. When manufacturers make these kind of things, it'd be nice if they did make a little bit more complete sets of them without having to go and hunt them around or piece build. But the Irwin ones seemed neat, and they were fractional, so I just wanted to bring attention to metric ones made by Bergen, and they actually have a pretty nice pouch. Other than that, I think that just about wraps it up. I really appreciate everybody who's been watching and subscribing. If you haven't subscribed, please do. Until next time, Catus Maximus out.